Hey, everybody. After a very, very, very long sabbatical, we are back. I'm Emily Moyer from Off Planet Radio, and Dani Katz is with me, and this is Words with Dani, and we got a lot to talk about, so we're going to get right in it. But before we do, Dani, how have you been? It's been a long time.
I've been great. It's so nice to be back with you, Emily, and everything's so full on these days.
So full on. All right, so what kind of inspired this? We were always planning on coming back at some point, but we had just been busy with other things. But Dani made a great little short video about mind control that she posted on Instagram the other day, and it was phenomenal. So I think what we're going to do is, why don't you tell me first what motivated you making it, and then we'll watch it, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, what motivated me making this video was, I just visited Seattle and was really shocked by how thick the mind control is in the Pacific Northwest and how much propaganda is everywhere. And I just hit the wall of being tired of having conversations with friends who have bought into the identitarian agenda and the propaganda and the mind control, and with whom in the middle of political conversations will totally lose their emotional center and freak out and start calling me white supremacist, where I'm like, you know me. Like, it's so absurd. So I just hit the wall, and I'm like, I'm over it, and I'm getting loud, and I'm starting to use the mind control term that I feel like has been marginalized and oftentimes, like, I've avoided uttering because, you know, all of the pushback that comes from being like a truther and you know, whatnot. And it's just, I've hit the wall. It's ridiculous. I'm not taking it anymore, and it's time for us to course correct and shift. So I made this video because I was annoyed.
All right. So with no further ado, it's a short video, so we just decided to include it here instead of sending you guys off looking for it. So here we go. Let's see, make sure we're sharing computer sound. And here we go.
If your political beliefs and talking about your political ideologies steals your emotional sovereignty and makes your heart beat really fast and gets your temperature rising and sends your body into these like cortisol surges, then you want to look at that. That's what mind control does. It takes our ability to have sane, rational conversations guided by our critical thinking and makes them into hysterical scream fest. So pay attention to whether the act of talking about your ideologies and beliefs has you losing your mind and losing your center and screaming at your friends who you're all of a sudden calling names and demonizing and dehumanizing.
Riverside Drive.
All right, so that was short, sweet, and to the point. Let's stop the share on that. But that pretty much, I mean, there's a couple of kinds of mind control, right? Like there's like hard individual programming where there's alters, and the shift in personality sometimes would be too subtle for somebody to recognize. And that's, you know, a certain kind that we've talked about a lot on Off Planet Radio. And then there's like targeted harassment, which is actually what politics is really. It's targeted harassment. And then there's this complete and total, like there's no subtlety to the mind control that's taken place with people. This is full on social engineering, like identity politics, like personality shifting kind of stuff, right? Like that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's a short, sweet, to the point kind of thing. Did you have an experience, like, can you go a little into more detail about what happened to you? Was it an exact thing? Did you have one conversation where you're like, I'm done? And what were the sort of details of that? Or is this observation?
I mean, there was one that ticked it off, and I'm not sure it's the best example, but it's just noticing people who, I mean, it's also coming off of the heels of Seattle, which was absolute insanity. But noticing people who are awake and have a lot of emotional intelligence and conscious communication skills, and then a switch is flipped and they go outer limits, and all of a sudden their emotions are 0 to 1,000, because as we know, the mind control mechanisms, the linguistic toxins and pathogens that are being embedded into the propaganda are attaching themselves to unintegrated trauma. So the emotional trauma is real, but it's not actually appropriate for the conversation at hand. But because it's being conflated and entangled, it's impossible to have a sane, rational conversation guided by critical thinking, because those mechanisms are being shut down and it becomes really hysterical. And then I'm talking to someone who's not there, and it's terrifying because they're not a person anymore, and they're not me anymore.
Okay, so
right?
There's a couple things here. So one could ask the question is, if the person is really awake, would they behave that way, right? And that's one way to look at it, but that was my first thought. But then I thought, well, no, actually, what we're talking about are people who are awake but haven't yet done the work to deprogram themselves. Because once you become awake, you start this like rabid consumption of information, right? Which is a different process than deprogramming yourself and finding out like how it is that any of these general mind control tactics that put us to sleep worked in the first place, right? So they're awake but not yet deprogrammed.
I think it's multifold, and I just want to jump in because I think it's important for us to define our terms. Honestly, when people say awake, and even when I use that term, like, dumb. I'm not even sure what that means. Like, none of us are awake. Like, we all have blind spots. We're all.
I just asked because you said.
I know that I said it.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah, okay.
It's like people who are hip to a certain degree of their own shit. But gotcha. I also think there's a difference as far as people being hip to the sham show. And that's different. And people who have availed themselves to the truth that the powers that be don't have our backs. And that simulation is much more nefarious than we think.
So I think what you're talking about is a particular feature of the left, right? Are people who have come from more the left, where they have a tendency to have worked on certain aspects of their self-awareness and their consciousness, but don't by nature have a conspiratorial mindset. So have either are not aware of the sham show, or have made fun of it, or pushed to the side, or all of that kind of stuff. I think all of those things exist on the left. And then on the right, we have, like, it's a little different. On the right, maybe it's a little bit more of by nature a conspiratorial mindset, but not quite as high of a level yet of self-awareness or consciousness expansion. So you're, yeah?
I mean, I'm not clear on two things. Yes to everything you're saying. Two things, as far as left, right, and whatever that sham show is, I don't know if righties are more hip to truth. The other thing that I'm going to invite us to do is to eschew the word conspiratorial, only because it's been so marginalized. Like, we know what that means, and I'm tired of it being used to shut down truth. It's bullshit.
All right.
I'm not saying that you, I'm just saying for all of us, like, let's move past that so that we can start to be heard in the mainstream. And yes, the delineations you're speaking to are totally correct. People have a certain degree of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, but who are not yet hip to the largesse of the sham show.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think it's a good idea to engage in this exercise as a demonstration of what we would like to see modeled on a larger scale. So I will come up with new and more colorful terms for describing this.
Model, Emily. I mean, so many people love you and listen to you and pay attention to you when you speak.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, it is mind control.
I think I'm sorry, just to go back to answer your question, like, there's the part of me that's like a badass evolutionary and is like devoted to the truth. And there's a part of me that's a human with like a tender little heart. Mm-hmm. And what inspired the video was like, I am so tired of people who allegedly know me and love me screaming dehumanizing bullshit at me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm over it. Like, it hurts and it's lame and it's really dangerous.
So it's interesting because you're in the that doesn't really happen to me very often anymore. And if it does, I just find it humorous. Right. But you're in that place where I was at probably 5 years ago with that. And I think it's so interesting how like people awaken or unravel this in different stages and in different orders, you know what I mean? Like in different, so you've been doing a lot of things for a lot of years that were part of your evolution to where you are now, that like are things that I'm just starting to do now, and vice versa, right?
Here's probably. The light just went super cuckoo. Just to be clear, the place where I'm at and where this is coming up is that I'm dating, and I'm dating lefties.
Right.
And that's the issue, because when I'm dating, it doesn't hurt with regular humans. When I open up my heart and I'm like, getting vulnerable and ooey gooey in a romantic space.
Yeah.
So my last boyfriend dumped me because we had lunch with a Trump supporter, and the cognitive dissonance skipped him out. So,
did you guys have lunch with Sally? Who are the Trump supporters? You know, I was like,
Sally's not going to be happy about that. No, my friend Nikki, who's like this super like open-hearted dude.
We love you, Sally.
But no, it comes with like dating and like trying to move past like, oh, I can date someone who reads the New York Times. Anyway, just to clarify, that's where it's coming up.
Okay, so yes, I still like I think that like I understand that that's where it's coming up, but there was a time when that stuff was happening to me a lot, and it just, now maybe it's because I have a media presence for a long time with some of these issues, and so like nobody would even come near me if they're just like, I don't want to talk to her because she's going to say that dumb shit and I don't agree with her and whatever, you know. But even in like my regular life where people don't know, it just either doesn't seem to happen or I'm sort of humored by it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that like, in a year or two, like maybe even 6 months or whatever, like it may cease to be a problem for you just in terms of who comes around you. But in the meantime, it would be nice if the world readjusted itself to our liking. Right?
Yeah, well,
I'm
the
just
thing
kidding.
is like I'm a quantum languaging consultant. So
Yeah.
like it's my job and my mission to perfect
Yes.
communication. So I put myself on the receiving end of these conversations that I know are going to go this way so that I can learn how to have them, how to hold my own center, and how to penetrate and be heard. So there's a learning involved.
I agree. I had a phase where I wasn't looking at it from a languaging perspective other than I started to figure out two things. I started to make my arguments better. Right? Like when I would get into these things with people, I started to like make sure I really knew my stuff. And I also looked for, and I guess this could be considered a kind of languaging. I started to look for metaphors or examples that I could explain to people that weren't political or in nature so that they could see what I was talking about. So it wasn't so much about picking which word as like finding a different way to present the same idea.
Right.
So I did go through that stage, and that actually was a really important stage in my development. And that happened before I started doing shows and stuff like that. Right. And thank goodness, because if I hadn't, then the shows would have been messier than they were even in the beginning for me.
Another conversation that inspired that video was that I went to Seattle to see Jonesy and Alex of Sigur Rós play a concert with the Wordless Orchestra and Choir, which if you've ever seen Sigur Rós, it's like a transcendent peak experience. It's such a heightened, cosmic, heart-opening, unifying, like, oh my God, this is amazing. They passed out pop rocks to the audience.
Nice.
And at one point during the concert, Alex signaled the audience and everyone put the pop rocks in their mouths and opened their mouths really wide. And it was just this like immersion of amazing stuff. Cool. It was just so beautiful. So after the concert, I was backstage talking to a woman who self-identified as a white person and as a social justice warrior, and you know, she's a millennial and she's in that conversation, and we were actually talking about Eric Weinstein's conversation with Bret Easton Ellis. Did you see that?
No.
Okay, this is gonna, and stop me if I'm gonna go too meandering because it kind of touches on the Soros thing that I know you said you wanted to touch on.
Mm-hmm.
But that conversation between Bret Easton Ellis and Eric was extremely valuable, and I was shocked. I was like, why would Soros let Eric have a valuable conversation and share truth with the world? What is going on here? And then in the middle of the conversation, out of nowhere, Eric goes, well, the big problem is Marshall Rosenberg and his nonviolent communication, which necessarily leads to censorship. And I was like, okay, so that was the kernel of bullshit in this otherwise good thing, but it had nothing to do with anything. And it pissed me off because, like, just to draw that insane conclusion and to demonize nonviolent communication at a time when we need it the most. So I was talking to this woman who lives in a social justice commune.
Sorry, I had to just...
I know, it's so sick there. So when I mentioned being a quantum languaging consultant, she asked me about nonviolent communication, and she mentioned using it in her commune. And then I mentioned this podcast, and we got into that conversation. And it was like we were in that post-concert loving high vibe space together.
You guys were both programmed by the programmable matter, all that shit. You were good, right? Because you ate Pop Rocks.
You think I put Pop Rocks in my mouth? Who are you talking to?
All right, cool.
Not enough money in the world. But I enjoyed that everyone else did.
I used to love them when I was little, but yeah, I wouldn't do it now.
Yeah. No. But anyway, so as I started talking about what I did, somehow the conversation got steered towards like racism, and she was getting more and more agitated. And she said to me like, well, you know, it's all well and good for you to tell me this about your languaging work, but you couldn't tell this to a Black woman who's a single mother of 6 kids. And I was like, okay, first of all, that your automatic association with a Black woman is single mother, 6 kids, she probably mentioned welfare as well, is fucking appalling. Second of all, I can share this work with whomever I want. The laws of physics and creation actually apply to everyone, so these rules are crazy. But I wasn't in that riled up state. Like, I was in this very like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but actually, yada, yada, yada. Do you have a bug? Because I have one too.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Anyway, she ended up getting super riled and losing her shit. And her friend came over and started like name calling me and getting really angry. And it was just like, wow, like we just had this peak experience together. I'm talking about quantum languaging and they're choosing to like get their panties in a bunch and freak out and create separation and demonize me as though like I'm a racist hate monger. And I'm just freaking tired of it. Like, I'm tired of how off the rails this conversation and this programming, this mind control is taking people. It's just annoying. Did that make sense? It was like a really roundabout thing.
It made sense. And hold that thought for 1 second.
Okay,
so she could not even ride the wave. She couldn't surf the wave to completion. She literally had to jump off of the wave.
Right. That was the whole point. And that was what really tripped me out and like stayed in my mind was like, wow, that ecstasy, like it was my choice to hold on to it as long as possible. I wanted to tell people about it. I got home, I stayed up late so I could call friends back in LA. It was just like so high. And she chose to like clamp it down and cut it off to like protect marginalized people. I don't even know. And like against me, like that's what's so weird is that like the truth speakers are the enemy, not the like social engineers who are doing real terrible shit.
So let's just, for a second though, like, because everybody's evolving at their own pace, right?
Yes.
Okay. So a way she still could get to the part that was important to her while still being able to enjoy being a human was ride the wave, right? And when you guys had surfed onto land, ask for your card or your email address, and Monday morning, hey, I really enjoyed the conversation and blah, 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 blah. Here's my question or my concern. How would you deal with it in terms of this?
But that's the point of mind control.
Yes.
Mind control shuts down that ability.
So that was my behavior hack. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like, yes, if someone still had hold of their critical thinking skills and was a sovereign being, that's how they would handle it. That's how you and I would handle it, right? Like when I hear people have different ideas, I don't flip. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
But what the mind control is doing is it's triggering the unintegrated trauma that has nothing to do with social justice shit at all, probably.
And the other thing that's happening here is, I'm going out on a limb, this is not her truth, but a lot of the people who are doing what she's doing are actually from well-to-do families.
100%.
And their traumas, I'm not saying they haven't had traumas, because a lot of people in well-to-do families have been molested, abused, have had other kinds of things and whatever, right? But the kind of, she has not been traumatized by the things that she's worried about other people being traumatized by. She isn't worried about the people in the basement at the pizza place. She's worried about people who are a different color and who have had a different social experience. And so she hasn't experienced that. So the mind control is so good that people are taking on traumas that not only have they not experienced, but it's unlikely that they ever would experience. And those traumas are controlling them more than the actual traumas that they have really experienced.
100%. And then what's even more twisted about that is it creates bigotry and racism, because most of the pushback that I get is from like white college girls at like very expensive private
at Vassar and places like that. Yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And the notion that there's this underclass that needs their protection is doing this to them. It's putting themselves on a pedestal and putting themselves down and only like deepening those hierarchy grooves. And I don't want to take us too far into that conversation, but like that's creating inequality. Like that's creating those inefficacies and inequities in our culture.
And those are
sense of perception.
Those are also the same universities where the most research is being done on social engineering and mind control and things like that, right? Like, in fact, I don't know if there's nothing out there on YouTube yet, and I haven't had the conversation with you about it, I don't think. But in my presentation in Texas and a show I did with Mike Williams that should be coming out soon, I talk about this paper that was released over the summer by Brown University where they talked about storing data on sugar molecules, right? So, right? So literally, like this could be a person like this who could be a test subject at a school. I mean, it's so stupid. I'm bringing something in that isn't really related, but since we have this thing with Pop Rocks, but like this is the whole thing. Like this is the petri dish that they're trying to, let's fill them up with sugar, get them in a social justice commune, right? And like,
yeah. Well, also, I mean, that goes in, I mean, let's not have the sugar. I could go there, but like,
right. Let's not. Yeah. But my point is, it's these ridiculous levels of mind control. Like, let's just see if we can just fucking put it in their food. Let's not even fucking like give them drugs anymore. Let's just put it in their fucking food. It's happening at these same places where all this social justice, the social justice bullshit is like not happening in any major way at Cal State Northridge. It's happening at Yale and Brown and this and that, which is where all these DARPA-funded research projects on mind control are happening as well. That was my point. It wasn't about my sugar thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And just tying it back to what you said, like, that's what really made me sad was like these women's choice to lose the high, to like bring an end to that, to drive their agenda, which isn't even their agenda. Like they're being
it's like that annoying girl who starts fighting with her boyfriend when you're all on mushrooms and everyone's on mushrooms.
Like we're backstage with Jonesy and Alex after a peak experience. Like bliss out.
Is Jonesy and Alex named after Alex Jones?
No, but I did get to ask Jonesy. I was like, hi, nice to meet you. Are you singing in Pleiadian? And he's like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, that's what every 5D nerd thinks. I'm like, you haven't heard that rumor about yourself?
That's funny. Anyway. But it's funny that they're called Jonesy and Alex too, right? So there you go.
And they're not. They're like from another dimension.
Okay. But that's what that Alex Jones talks about, the creatures, the DMT, you know, he has this retarded version of the DMT creatures from the other dimensions that they're the ones running the politicians. And he has his own version about the creatures on DMT, right? You heard it? There's a funny video where he's talking about that. Okay. My friend Chris Geo made put music to it, and it's kind of funny. I'll see if I can find it. I'll share it with you. Anyway, all right, on to the next topic. So we're going to, we wanted to talk about what's been going on with this Hillary Clinton, Tulsi Gabbard, Jill Stein BS. But before we do that, I think I want you to lay out, because you mentioned Soros in regards to Eric Weinstein, right? And I want you to put forward your theory on Andrew Yang, because I think it's a good one. I had in my narrative of all the different possibilities of what's going on, Andrew Yang, I had him cast in a certain role as a certain character, and you gave me pause to think that, okay, he's possibly playing multiple roles, which is how mind control works also. Right. So lay your theory on.
Okay. I want to preface this theory by saying, like, I don't claim to know what the hell is going on in the various levels of the simulation. So I'm not saying that I'm right. And this is what rings as true to me through my lens of perception of the bits of information that I have. And the other piece that I just want to say, and I think it was either like David Icke's most recent interview or a Sasha Stone interview, but they said something that really rung true with me, which is like, when you understand the end game of the global agenda, then you can see how all the pieces come together as they're being played out.
Yes.
And since I've been tracking this for 20 years, like that's what's informing my intel and my perspective.
Okay,
so
and I just want to say one thing before she lays it out. There's going to come a point when she's laying this out where people are going to go, well, duh, right? And then I'm going to say why it's not well, duh, and why it's actually a more interesting theory than it seems. So, okay, go ahead.
You're saying people aren't going to think my theory is so interesting?
Well, there's a feature to this theory that I don't think that you had thought of when you told it to me. And at first I was like, yeah, whatever. But then when I went and did some digging, I figured out why it's a good theory. I don't even know if you know exactly why it's a good theory.
I don't, but I'm so tickled that you like my theory. Okay, so here are the pieces of the theory. I first saw Andrew Yang when he did his Joe Rogan. I don't know if he's done multiple Joe Rogans, but if he did his first early Joe Rogan, and I was like, he sounds like a bro tool with no background in politics, and I get that he's into his UBI, which he hadn't yet branded Freedom Fund or whatever.
Freedom Dividend, yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
That's like Patriot Act, folks. When you hear, yeah.
Freedom, Patriot, whatever. So,
I hear freedom, divide, and end. Freedom, dividend, divide, and end. There you go.
Yes. Okay, so I heard him and I was like, all right, this makes sense. Also, I mean, this is fine as UBI thing, but this feels like a really weak candidate. He doesn't have any experience. He's not really talking about anything else. And as I've said to you a million times, like, why are we already signing off on rampant automation that only serves Amazon and all the other corporate oligarchs who are raping our culture? Like, why don't we have a conversation about whether that's a smart move for our culture before we just give our—
So you're saying so people have paid attention to him because he is bringing attention to something that others aren't. But instead of just going, well, it's going to happen regardless, so we need to do this money thing, let's first have a conversation about whether we should allow it. And then after that, we can talk about if we're going to allow it, what we're going to do. So the person who's correct on this issue is not Andrew Yang, it's Tucker Carlson. Because Tucker Carlson is like, whoa, stop. Why are we doing this? Let's talk about that first.
I'm going to stop you because the reason I'm going to stop you is just because Tucker Carlson triggers a lot of people and a lot of people have a lot of pushback, and it's not one person's right and one person's wrong.
But he's the only public person I've heard going, whoa. Why are we even thinking about doing
this? And it's not our smartest move. Why don't we have that conversation first? And it's so interesting the way that Yang is leading that conversation and driving that socialist agenda.
The foregone conclusion.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that was sort of red flag number one. Then I saw Eric Weinstein, who, as I've said before, I used to love him. He's changed his tune in so many ways that I'm like, what is going on with this guy? It's not lining up. It doesn't make sense. And he's been really pushing Andrew Yang, my boy Andrew Yang, my buddy, whatever.
Tell everybody what the most disturbing thing about Eric Weinstein's shift is his embeddedness with.
Okay, so I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. It started when he just started shifting towards like some hysterical anti-Trump stuff that was standard leftist pushback of things taken out of context and like distorted to make it seem like he's racist or this, that. But if you looked at the whole thing, like anyone with a brain knew it wasn't true. It also didn't line up with his friendship with Peter Thiel / his boss, where it's like your mind is operating on enough levels. You know enough people who support Trump because of strategy and policy that this particular angle of pushback isn't lining up with your intellect. So that wasn't making sense to me. Then he started pulling some social justice shit. And a year and a half ago, when he was on Rubin with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, he proposed a one-time gender-free pronoun shift that would very easily and logically and objectively get us out of the pronoun mishigas conversation and just move our country in a more neutral place. And he used the example of Ms. being a one-time shift that was awkward at first. But
I remember this. Yeah.
Right? And I was like, this is totally sane. And then his last Rogan appearance, he started whining about his intersex friend and how much it broke his heart that there wasn't a box for him on forms that he fills out, and Joe even called him out on it, and he like got teary-eyed and was like, no, don't go there, Joe. And I'm like, where is all this like hysterical, emotional social justice stuff coming from it doesn't line up. So then he launched the portal. And on his very first portal show, he was playing the Jew card, which, you know, a lot of the IDW does, a lot of people do. And he said that it was too big of a wound for him to go to Germany until his friend George Soros sent him there. And I was like, oh, it all comes together, like no duh. And that might be your no duh. But let's wait till we get the Andrew Yang part. Okay, so that was the piece where I'm like, okay, so this explains Weinstein's shift. And again, this is my theory. Like, I've never met the guy, but this is me putting the pieces together and talking to other people who've been tracking and saying, like, yeah, there's so many inconsistencies, it's not really lining up. So then, first debate, Andrew Yang says, with a straight face, Russia's the biggest threat to our national security. And I'm just like, are you a retarded kindergartner? And apologies to whoever's triggered for me using that word, but like, you clearly have no understanding of global politics and what's really going on to say with a straight face, with what the fuck is going on in China, that Russia is our biggest threat. And then after the debate, I expected, because I'm such an idealist, for Weinstein to pull back and be like, okay, I was wrong, he's a moron. But he doubled down on his support for the guy, where I'm like, okay, they're all in bed together. And then I was in Santa Cruz with my friend Justin, who was talking about Yang, and I'm like, yeah, he's a tool. And he's like, it's gonna come down to and by the way, the whole time I've been maintaining the Dems are such morons that Trump's gonna win again. Just because they keep angling, everyone keeps angling their campaign against beating Trump. It's not about their vision for the country and where they're leading us. It's about beating Orange Man bad, which is fueling the construct of Orange Man bad, which means he's gonna win.
Yeah.
So then I was with my friend Justin, and he's like, it's gonna come down to Trump and Yang. And I just dropped in and I just saw it, and it rang true. And it's like, of course, because it's Soros versus Trump. It's the globalist agenda versus the wild card. And he's not a chick, which the country still doesn't seem to be ready for, but he's kind of ethnic. He's got that good old boy, every man, not a politician, slangy speak bro thing.
Like he puts out his Spotify playlist and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. And I just saw, like, just my spidey sense was like, yes, that's totally how this is going to go down. And then I shared it with you, and I felt very validated with the fact that rang true for you.
Well, so when she shared with me, I was like, well, yeah, the fucking Soros. I'm like, well, how do you think, I was looking at it from this like Trojan horse thing, right, angle. I'm like, okay, well, let me check it out, right? Like I was like, yeah, like, well, duh, that doesn't sound like a super interesting theory. I could see that, right? And whatever, I was like, let me think about it. But then I decided, okay, I'm going to go look and see if there's any evidence that George Soros supports Andrew Yang. And I couldn't find any. And that's what made it, because this Eric Weinstein link, right? They're starting to be more careful because they know that everybody's on to the George Soros backs all the things that we don't want kind of bullshit. Right. So what I would have just thought it was like, oh, that's not a very good theory. Like, yeah, like it's a good theory, but it's like pedestrian, right? Until I found that I couldn't find anything. And I can usually find Soros. I mean, I can find like Soros hanging off of like my cat, one of my cat's hairballs. You know what I mean? Right? Like I can usually find. I couldn't find anything. I could only find just the fact that like the only way there was any connection between them in articles was the fact that Andrew Yang is running for the Democratic Party and that George Soros tends to back Democrats. There was no actual link between the two of them. I'm like, okay, they're starting to get. They're starting to get more clever here. And that may have been one of the purposes and functions of the IDW was to bring this situation in. He's getting more clever. He's like you can't have it can't be so easy for people to find because people will go and look, George Soros, Andrew Yang. No, it's not there. Andrew Yang must be good. He must be clean. Now Andrew Yang in my head was the reason he was okay, so I have said a number of times, if you're interested in Tulsi Gabbard or Andrew Yang, to me, it's a sign that you're not mentally ill. Whereas if you're interested in any of the other candidates, you obviously are. Maybe that's too vast of a general statement. because he's at least doing something different. My complaint about him had been, that he's not answering any of the important questions because nobody's asking them, right? That had been my complaint. And why has he been so guarded from those questions? The George Soros thing made sense, but like, of course, I really thought I was going to find links to Soros, and therefore the theory was interesting. But what makes it interesting is that there aren't links, which means that they're getting more clever with this, which means that they have a lot more riding on him than they want people to think, right? Like he is, I think what's happening here, like, I don't think it's the quite obvious thing, like your friend said, it's going to come down to that. I think they're lining up a couple of situations here. I think that like they have a few playbooks going, and we're going to get into the other one now in just a second. But I think it's becoming very obvious that the Biden, Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg thing that they were hoping one of those would go is not going to fly. Nobody's going to go for that.
Do you think nobody's going to go for that? Because I see so many lefties like weirdly rabid about Warren. Which
the problem is that the Warren is not going to. No one who they need to start. There was a lot of people who voted for Obama who voted for Trump. For the Democrats to win, they have to get some of them back. And there's not anybody who moved from Obama to Trump who will come back for Warren. The only ones that people will come back for would be, in my opinion, Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, or Andrew Yang. Because each one of them represents an issue. So there's a lot of people who are most concerned with with health insurance and Medicare stuff, and Bernie Sanders covers that. So they might be willing to switch back because Donald Trump hasn't delivered on better health care. They might be willing to switch to Tulsi Gabbard because a lot of people are anti-war. A lot of veterans don't want to vote for someone who's going to bring more war.
She's against the open borders, which is fucking awesome.
Right, but I'm saying that's not the thing. That's not the thing that's going to shift people who move to Trump back to Democrats. So those people are going to stay with Trump.
Although the vaccination thing, I know, shifted a lot of Democrats for Trump, and Tulsi and Buttigieg, his name, are the only ones who aren't
right. But in terms of the vast amount of people in the public, the vaccination issue is more sensitive here in California than it is in a lot of other places. Right. In California is the only place where the right and the left sort of agree on that, right? That the far right and the far left agree no vaccination. So they meet around back, kind of thing.
Yeah. It's not a partisan issue. It's
right. And then with Andrew Yang, because a lot of people who are right-wingers, also blue-collar workers, Andrew Yang's thing with the helping them bridge the gap.
That's where he's going to get the Trump.
Right. Those three are the only three that are viable to take votes away from Trump. Okay. So they would have loved to have gone with the other thing, but it's not going to work. So they're going to have to go with one of these three and I don't think it's going to be Bernie Sanders. Right.
But I don't think it's going to be Tulsi because she's too much of a threat.
Well, here's this. Okay. So she's too much of a threat.
She's too sovereign.
Take her at face value. And this is, while as a human being, she doesn't disgust me, and there's things about her I find appealing. I don't believe in any of this nonsense. I think this is all a dog and pony show. So what
you don't
role?
Think she's sovereign?
No, I think she is. I think because she believes in Al Qaeda and terrorism and things like that. She thinks that that's like a real thing, not a created thing. She understands that our government provides them arms, but she doesn't also seem to understand that our government actually created it. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if that's just like a blind spot for her because of her attachment to her military service.
Right.
So there's that, but there's a couple things. She is a member of the CFR. I've said this from day one. Council on Foreign Relations. Okay, which is a left-wing agenda creating thing. But a guest we had on the show last night, who this will probably go out before that does, so I'm not going to get too deep into this, but we had a conversation about something that's been playing in my back mind, and that like how can she be a puppet on the string? And she seems to also have connections to the right-wing version of the CFR, which is the Council on National Policy, which is a much more secretive thing than the Council on Foreign Relations is.
Okay.
But they were involved with Trump coming to power.
Okay.
They've always been involved with the right-wing push for, the CFR is more public than the CNP is, but the CNP is actually behind pushing a progressive drug agenda, even though they're supposedly right-wing. All of this, there's different wings of the bird, but the bird always flies forward.
Okay.
Right? So she does seem to have some connections to some things that are more nationalistic ideas, which would be considered right-wingish.
Okay.
I don't think there's and I agree, I don't want to get too much farther into it, but I do think that she is a tool at a different level than someone like a Hillary Clinton or an Elizabeth Warren is a tool, or even an Andrew Yang. It's a much more subtle kind of tool, right?
Okay.
But it's a tool nonetheless, and she creates an option for the controllers to act as a steam valve that will satisfy people who want to change, but she will also enforce a certain perception of reality that those people may have been moving towards questioning, and that is that terrorism really exists, and that is that the only solution to globalism might be nationalism. And I don't want to go too much more into the detail on this because of the conversation with the guests on the show. Yeah. We can have a later conversation about it after you've seen it.
And I want to do some research anyway, just
so she's not. We're dealing with like levels of corruption, and is it overt corruption or more subtle, and or maybe some of it isn't even corruption but more manipulation. As opposed
also
to,
like whose interests and whose agenda are they up front for?
Yes.
My sense is that at that level they all are.
Right. So there's that. So then we have this situation between Hillary, Tulsi, and Jill Stein's a background player, but so let's go Hillary and Tulsi.
Right.
This could be part of a dog and pony show. While they want, like, they haven't decided. The other option is that, oh, well, none of these other candidates are viable. Let's scoot Hillary in there, which sounds crazy to you and I.
Crazy.
But these people are, remember, we're dealing with mental illness here, right? And so it's setting up this sort of like, if they decide to go with Tulsi, she's withstood the onslaught of Hillary Clinton, so that makes her a viable candidate, right? And with this thing with Hillary Clinton, it's kind of like, how sick are the American people? Are they willing to let somebody just ride in on their magic carpet? I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I have to tell you, in the same 24 to 36 hours, multiple people who I respect their work for a long time have come to this theory as well.
That they're going to bring Hillary into the race?
Yeah.
I mean, I just think, are the Dems that stupid? Like, are they really that stupid that they would do that to themselves? That's insanity.
The bringing Hillary in would be for the purpose of maintaining Donald Trump as president, for sure.
Okay, then that would make total sense.
Right.
So but I don't think anyone has a chance against him. But yeah, that would clinch it 1,000,000%.
Yes, right.
That would make the most sense, and it's going to get the left all the more riled and crazy.
And that's also, and Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard both play roles in that version too. That will become obvious as it plays out.
Hillary's so hated, and why is she not in prison? I just can't.
Right.
Like, did they not grab Epstein's files? Did that not happen? Did they not seize his computers?
Anyway. Nobody cares. It's already out of the news.
Right, because we have this bullshit impeachment, Ukraine, just nonsense going on.
Right.
Look, I defer to you. You're talking to more people about this. I think the idea of bringing Hillary in is absolute stupidity, insanity, absurdity, and yes, it would 1,000,000% clinch it for Trump. So if that's the chess game,
but think about all the things if they do that. Think of all the drama that would go on in this kind of environment. How many war crimes they could commit in the background and nobody would notice because everyone would be talking about this. How much money they can steal. How many bunk loans they can give people. How much how much 5G they can install and nobody's
loud.
Nothing else, right? So they can get all the things for whatever the real agenda is in place while we all watch the shit show.
But the only thing about that is it shuts down the socialism conversation that seems to be coming through the left.
They're perfectly happy to shut down socialism for enthusiastic light fascism. right, like it's the kind of thing.
We're already in enthusiastic light fascism. We're already there,
right? But it's right now the left thinks we're living in enthusiastic light socialism, and the right thinks we're living in freedom and a good economy and whatever. This would be enthusiastic.
The right No one else goes through TSA? No one else has their bags checked when they go to the Ramadan and freaks out?
Right, but the right doesn't notice as many problems with their own side's agenda when they're in power, right? You know, see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So this would
right, because it's keeping us safe.
The thing that could possibly happen could usher in a combination of people mad that there isn't socialism, right? And other people enthusiastic about this new semi-bipartisan form of light fascism that has been existing forever, but now is would be more out in the open. Right. So you've then eliminated everything else, and people are the only choices we've now are fascism or socialism. Fascism or socialism. There's nothing else. So you've just taken the margins of all this conversation that's happening out here, people, and just scooted it right here.
Well, that's what I thought they were doing. That's why what I saw with the Yang Trump. Like, right. To me, that's fascism, socialism. This is...
Right, but it's only, like, there's going to be some things that happen that make it... if the thing happens with Hillary, and if Tulsi plays the possible role that, like, I see her maybe possibly going to be slid into, then this would suddenly become... in some ways, an agreed upon. It's hard to explain, but the whole thing is stupid. And so my best advice to everybody is to not vote and stay home and eat popcorn and watch the show.
Well, here's another piece that I just saw from what you said is like, because, you know, I'm looking at things through the lens of masculine and feminine, not dudes and women, but masculine and feminine. And so what I'm seeing, like when Tulsi called out Hillary on Twitter, part of me was like, good for you. But another part of me was like, but really with the name calling and the cat fight, it's just a cat fight, right? It's like the worst of feminine hysteria and bad behavior playing out. So to sort of like demonize putting the feminine in the office when it gets so hysterical, do you know what I'm saying? Right. Like people's worst fears about women in office, which I personally don't have. Right. But I just see it as like exacerbating that particular lens of the narrative, which I just like, while I have the chance, I also want to say I see coming through this whole social justice thing of having this like hysterical feminine emotion pulling like healthy masculine into silence and submission. And it's like, okay, we talk about, and I don't like the terms toxic masculinity or toxic feminine, but talk about the feminine shadow being off the rails right now. That's what we're seeing as far as that identitarian emotional hysteria.
I would say that, like, I think Hillary's just a liar and crazy. And I feel like
people think she's a woman and they associate her with a woman. I don't associate her as a human. But to see her and Tulsi acting like catty.
But I will say this: I don't think Tulsi act catty. I felt like she behaved in a respectful manner, and I feel like she did the thing in a sense that if you believe in this whole dog and pony show needed to be done, because my argument about Bernie Sanders is when Hillary Clinton did the bullshit with him, he just shut up and took it and didn't say anything about it and then ended up endorsing her. So this 100%. Is a person actually saying no.
Oh, 100%. And I appreciated it. And I do, like I said, I take issue with name calling and all that. The warmonger, I was like, okay, but it does feel appropriate. I think the line that was crossed, which actually Sally brought up when I hung out with her yesterday.
Hi, Sally gets 2 mentions in one show. We love you, Sally.
But was when she was like, I wondered who was behind this all along. It went to this like hysterical place of like, okay, now you've kind of gone off.
I think that's where we get into some of this stuff, right? Like, that's because there really is
your theory.
You have to understand nuance to see it. So people are gonna be like, I don't get it why it does. But like, really, like there's a lot of factions that would seem to be on opposing sides, but they're all really together and they all just hate the Clintons. Right? Like the Clintons don't fit into that. They have their own mafia that's a different mafia than the rest of the mafias kind of combined.
100%.
Right, okay.
But I don't think, I mean, from my vantage point, I see the pushback, like a lot of people don't want Tulsi in there for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
And it seemed a little hysterical when she was like, oh, it's you, it's always been you. That was for me. And like I said, I'm so happy that she pushed back the way she did, but that angle of it was a little
But I think that isn't, I think if the deeper, much deeper level conspiracy is at play, that's an important piece of it. So, so we'll see how this all plays out. Maybe we'll all be wrong. Like maybe, you know, maybe Amy Klobuchar will be president. Anyway, that's what Bill Maher's hoping for. He likes Amy Klobuchar apparently, or something like that.
I mean, do we care what he likes? Do we care what he
No,
thinks?
but I'm just saying it because it's just, you know, whatever. Yeah. Right. Maybe we're all just sitting here like dancing about architecture and we're all going to be wrong. You know what I mean? So
I mean, they're about to pull the mothership false flag any second. So then like what's going to happen after that? You know, like it's like I see so many like unforeseen pivots about to hit our nation that like.
At least though, when they did pull the false flag, it wouldn't have been sexist because it will be the mothership and not the fathership. So there you go. Good job there.
Well done.
Okay, so let's move on from. Is that topic complete? Are we good on that?
I mean, I feel like we're good for now.
Good for now. Okay. All right. So last thing is Edward Snowden, or the CGI composite known as Edward Snowden.
The hologram.
The hologram.
Snowden
Right.
on Joe Rogan.
Was on Joe Rogan, and I didn't watch the whole thing because like after that charade of the first 15 minutes where the hologram known as Edward Snowden pretended that he didn't know who Joe Rogan was until like 2 weeks ago when Bernie Sanders was on his show or something like that.
Which, P.S., if that was true, he just spent 6 weeks cramming 24/7 because I did watch the whole thing, and then all of a sudden he knew everything about Joe after pretending he'd never really heard of him.
Yeah, Edward. So this is the, you know, and the whole thing with the black screen behind him, it's like he's in a black hole somewhere in Russia, and you know. So let's put all that aside, assuming that, you know, this Edward Snowden character is more than just a name from the book 1984, because there is a character in 1984 named Snowden. Anyway,
that's so good. Did you watch long enough to see Joe take out his switch earphones?
No. Oh, he had to get his instructions from command?
Kind of like when he
and Alex went to the bathroom together?
Because I was like, I was just waiting. I was like, when is the blip going to happen where so that happened.
Okay.
Yeah, it was ridiculous sham show of disinformation, like it was absurd.
Well, part of it is it takes Edward Snowden 30 minutes to say something that we could just say in one sentence, right? The way he describes things when he's talking about...
He just talked and talked and talked and talked about his book, and then the multiple like made up stories that he's pushing.
Right, but he's everything is scripted. He's reading off a teleprompter, or just, you know, or whatever. I don't know. He's in some sort of virtual reality kind of thing. I don't understand exactly what's going on, but so I didn't watch the whole show. I suffered through about 20 minutes, and I was like done. But I thought it was interesting that this is, I think, the first time Joe's done one that isn't a face-to-face. That isn't live. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Edward Snowden is like the weirdest character, because I'm not sure exactly what angle he's pushing other than one where we believe that some truth is being exposed that isn't really being exposed. It's just part of the lie. Right. So
that was really like I was watching and I'm like, what are they laying the groundwork for? Like, what is this prepping us to go into? So I talked to my friend today before we did this, and I mentioned we were talking about Snowden, and he's like, oh, I saw on CNN that he debunked the whole Area 51 thing. And I'm like, I had a feeling when he said that was one of the main purposes, and that's what the mainstream media picked up. Not his
debunked Area 51 in terms of debunked an alien conspiracy, or debunked that whole let's all raid Area 51 on this particular day.
Snowden said that there's no such thing as aliens and there's no such thing as chemtrails, and that he knows this from going through every single Google search, having a backlog on the internet. He announced, but P.S. it was out of nowhere. Wasn't topical.
So then just 40 or 50 years ago, clouds changed from fluffy and round to linear and expansive. Okay.
Not to mention all the data we've seen coming out of Right?
I'm just being silly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was super absurd. And as soon as he said it, that was when I texted you because so the audience knows Emily sent me the link. As soon as I heard that, I was just like disinformation. Like that, like I knew that from the get-go. Well,
then you also told me that he was referencing Wikipedia as proof for things.
Yeah, so he went off on some. It was weird. He sold Pelosi down the river multiple times, which is interesting. I'm like, okay, so that's an angle here, is to discredit Nancy Pelosi. Okay, so there's that piece. And then he had this like take on how all the intelligence agencies let us down when it came to 9/11 because they all knew ahead of time. Mm-hmm. But then he like switches story of like, oh, it was just in the internal politics of it. Like he kind of blamed them and he took the onus off. Where I'm like,
so he made the intelligence agencies seem incompetent rather than complicit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And that their hands were tied because they didn't have the proper internal communication set up.
Right. That's an old story. We've heard that from a lot of people. Yeah.
And so then when he was telling one of his 9/11 related stories, he's like, and this is all true, Joe. You can check Wikipedia, which is just, that's when I like burst out laughing because I mean, Wikipedia is now code for we are lying, this is disinformation, this is 1,000,000% globalist.
Well, and then what was funny is you today sent me a video from RT, and on YouTube, anytime there's an RT video, there's a thing under it that says RT is funded in whole or in part by the Russian government, and their evidence for that is that Wikipedia says so. So Edward Snowden is in Russia using this story about we can trust Wikipedia, and we're supposed to be in Cold War with Russia, so their videos have to be noticed. We have to know that their government is funding RT, and the proof is also Wikipedia. So that should be the end of the idea that there's two different sides.
Except for the fact that Google has given more than $3 million to Wikipedia this year alone. Almost $10 million is completely editing their content to drive their agenda.
Yeah.
And their big pharma overlords. I mean, Wikipedia is a big fat joke at this point.
Yeah, it is a big fat joke. I mean, I think Urban Dictionary is like more respectable than
probably.
Yeah.
So yeah, the whole thing is just a big sham of disinformation, and I'm very curious to see what it's laying the groundwork. It's clearly prepping for something. Joe didn't speak at all. Mm-hmm. Just let him go off the whole time. Yeah, they're clearly paving the way for something.
There was one important thing that was brought up right at the beginning of the show that I don't know that I've talked about it with you, but Robert and I have certainly talked about this, is that Joe Rogan is the most important person in media, which is ridiculous, but it's the truth. And the truth. Edward Snowden said that it was his publisher's idea to get him to suggest that you need to go on Joe Rogan so you can get out in front of this story. So the idea, they're wanting people to believe that he needs to go on Joe Rogan to protect him from what the mainstream media wants to do. So nobody actually notices that, oh, actually Joe Rogan is now the mainstream media. They're trying to sell it as, oh, this is like some underground shit, and Edward Snowden has to peddle his story here, right? Because
I feel like you and I've talked about this a lot, not just because I love the show you and Robert did about Joe Rogan's MK, but also because of how many times in the past year and a half since Joe has started to push the socialist agenda, how many times you hear him say, well, I'm totally free. Well, I can say what I want. And it's like, okay, if someone's telling me how sovereign they are, then I know they're not. Because
there's people go around declaring their sovereignty over and over and right. Yeah, I know. Right. But they also, look, the only presidential candidates that I told you there's only 3 that matter: Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, and Tulsi Gabbard. He hasn't had any of the others on. So that tells you right now where we're going.
Right.
Joe Rogan is the new Walter Cronkite, and Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders, and Andrew Yang are really where it's going to be at. All this other shit is a dog and pony show. Other than this idea that Magic Carpet Ride might, roll in right over them. All right, Hillary Clinton. But dude, literally a person who used to get people to eat bugs on TV is controlling everybody's minds.
Yeah, but like as you said, who's controlling his mind? Like I
Right.
do feel like he goes in and out.
In
There
and
are
out.
moments where it feels like he is himself and he is driving his ship.
Any person who's been watching his show for a long time and still like likes him should be offended by the fact. It should be really look at what has happened, where in his early days he was questioning the moon landing, and now he does a show in a NASA jumpsuit.
Oh, totally. And he pretends not to know about things that he absolutely, I mean, we know this.
Yeah.
Anyone who's watched him for a long time, I think, is saying this, is commenting on this.
Yeah.
And Joe's absolutely a tool in this election. In a huge, like, it's so obvious, just like you said. Like, as soon as he had Wang on, I'm like, okay, what's up?
Wang? You just called him Wang? You're funny. That's pretty funny. Yeah.
Well, you know, his last name ends with a W.
Yeah.
Whatever. I misspoke. I'm an asshole. I'm a racist.
Right. Very inconsiderate. All right. I think that's a good place to end. I think we've pretty much covered all the stuff here. So, yay. We'll be back sooner. Yes, sometimes. Yes, for sure. And we'll be back sooner. Won't be as long for the next one. So, yeah. All right, guys. We'll see you later. And real quickly, tell people in case they've forgotten where they can find you. And you have a workshop. You have a workshop coming up too.
I have a live online workshop coming up. It's November 16th. So wherever you are in the country, come. It is how to empower yourself and the world with your every word. Maybe it's with quantum languaging. And I'm also doing coaching and consulting. So hit me up at quantumlanguaging.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel through that website. And let's play.
Sounds good. All righty, guys. We will see you next time. Toodaloo.